Well, hello and welcome. My name is Sheila Wilson. I'm a registered nurse, and I am president of Stop Healthcare Violence. My website is stophealthcareviolence.org. We have Facebook pages, Stop Healthcare Violence, and also Heal the Healer. I am a host on Passionate World Talk Radio. I was using the name Wine and Cheese, but changed it to Stop Healthcare Violence. Today, my guest is Debra Falzoi, and she's the founder of Dignity Together. A safe workplace benefits not only the employee, but the public, also the business. Our disclaimer is the views of the guest may not represent the views of the host or the station. Well, hello, Debra.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me.
I am honored to have you on. Tell me how you're doing.
I'm good. I'm plugging away at this hard work here and, taking it day by day, so I'm good.
Well, it's really, I'm doing A-okay. I trying to get things done. I have a little issue with my office that is an absolute disaster, but every time I kind of clean it up, it just gets worse. But,
Yeah.
Someday it will be A-okay. But
yeah.
Tell me, how did you get started in your Dignity Together? What was that all about?
So I experienced a bullying situation at work back in 2007. It was at a large university in Boston, and there were some tactics of removing responsibilities from me, excluding me from meetings that I should have been at, replacing, finding somebody else to take over some of my work. And when I spoke up about what was happening, I experienced retaliation in the form of false accusations from this same person. This person actually wasn't my boss, but they were a higher up, and they, had power over me. They were overseeing one of the projects that I was working on. And so, when I reported the problem, thinking that, okay, my employer is not going to think that this is reasonable, they're going to protect me in this, I reported the situation to the head dean, I reported to HR, ultimately I reported to the provost's office, and at every turn I was kind of blown off, excuses were made. There was, regardless of the evidence that I had, there was always sort of this siding with the person in power, because I later realized it was the easier thing for them to do. And for them to acknowledge what was happening would have meant potential liability, and they didn't want that, and they didn't have to have it. They knew that I had less power than they did. So that was, like I said, back in 2007, and since then I've been working on workplace anti-abuse legislation. I realized at the time, I didn't even know what to call this, and I'm eventually finding something on Google about workplace bullying. I was like, I cannot believe that this is allowed, but then, having studied sociology and understanding that people in power write the rules to keep themselves in power, it was both completely understandable but completely appalling at the same time. So, I worked on educating people about this phenomenon, helping them understand that this is a thing. This is a problem that the employer's incompetence will result in health harm. I've educated people on how to recognize what was happening in the first place, helps them understand what would happen what would be likely to happen if they went to, if they took a course of action that was similar to something I did, where HR, even if the representatives in HR want to help, they're working for management who answers, in situations like this to their legal department, and they are all there to protect the employer. So things that I learned the hard way that I want to help people understand, and things that I've, in the, I guess 14 years it is now that I, since that happened, where I've done a lot of research and reading and talking to people, hundreds of people who've experienced workplace bullying, and seeing how this really operates like a playbook, and helping people understand that while they're alone in the situation, there is comfort and support in hearing from other people who've been through it, helping them understand just how this whole phenomenon works, so that they can, make choices in their life that serve them, and they're not, as I say, trying to figure out how they can fit into somebody else's mission statement. So just helping people take back their power. And some of these things are, ingrained in childhood, not necessarily, but just helping them understand why this behavior happens. A lot of it has to do with, systemic issues, systemic racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, any form of othering somebody. But my goal is to help take people out of that isolation and help them get some comfort, so that they can start the healing process once they're out of the toxic situation.
And so people can get in touch with you to help with if they feel as though they're bullied. Did you know that you were in that toxic environment? I mean, how long did it take you to learn that there was something going on? Because I find it's insidious. It doesn't always just, you're not sitting there and somebody speaks to you and all of a sudden you say, oh, I shouldn't have put up with that. Did it take you a while?
It took me about 6 months to figure it out. And one of the, this isn't always the situation, but there is a typical situation where you will be, the person who is bullying you will be charming you. They'll be charismatic, or, the person who actually was bullying me in this situation, I initially, thought she was good at what she did. I thought we had a great relationship. That's done on purpose by the bully more often than not. I mean, sometimes it can just be situations where there's a manager who isn't feeling very secure about, their ability to lead, and therefore they, overcompensate and focus on the power aspect rather than, having some humility, admitting what they don't know, and creating this collaborative human environment where well-being matters. But when I started to see the signs of the toxicity, they started to increase, that the tactics started to escalate. And not only that, but I could actually, in this case, see the bully doing it to other people. And, I tend to internalize things until I've fully processed them, or until they've gotten to a level where it becomes crystal clear in my mind that, they are the issue here. And even if I did something to contribute to something, like, their abuse is the problem. End of story. So, I mean, in this particular case, there was that, I was able to see that it was happening to other people. So it became even more clear to me that this was an issue with the bully. And therefore I was able to detach, I think more quickly than had the situation not had that element to it. I mean, I do talk to targets where they're in a situation where they've been in it for years, and, maybe they've seen it early on, maybe they haven't. But in my situation, it just happened to be a little clearer. And I did have some, I guess, cushioning, or like some access to other people who where I was able to find another job, probably within 3 months or a few months of that, within a year I was out of that job. So I know not everybody has a situation where they have a connection that can help them get a job, or, some kind of safety net, whether that's savings to help them through a certain period until they find something else, or, a spouse's income that they can rely on for a bit, or, whatever that is. A lot of people aren't in a situation that allows them to leave. But in this situation, I was able to do that and luckily move on to another job. So yeah, to get back to your question, it was about 6 months or so before the light switched, so to speak, and I was able to see that the charm was wearing off and the abuse tactics started to kick in.
That's as I said, I thought that when you first start getting bullied, it's really insidious. You don't even realize it. But I don't know if that happens all the time, because I'm the type of a person that would give that type of a person, well, he or she is now having a bad day and she just took that out on me. She probably forgot. She's probably busy. She has a bunch of kids. And it would probably take me more than 6 months. But could you give me a tip on if this is happening to me? Rather than, is there any clue? You mentioned you didn't go to meetings when you thought that you should have been there at the meetings. You were probably the head at the time. You had more information, or maybe somebody else. When would you really realize that you're getting bullied? Or do you ever? You said it took you about 6 months to realize it. But did you see any big signs saying, take warning, something like that?
In my particular case, because there was that charm at the beginning, and that is very typical, I noticed, one of the first signs that something was off was when this person told me that they, one of the main reasons that I took the job was to work on a website. And this bully told me at like a social function at work that they found somebody to help me with the website, and I didn't actually need help on the website. Like, it was the one thing that I was most excited to work on. And I just thought, like, that's interesting. Like, she's posing this as help, but it really should have been a conversation. Like, if she truly wanted to help me, this should have been, what area do you want help in? How can I help you? Like, just my needs didn't matter in that conversation. I didn't see it as bullying or even ill-intended. And I know that doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of it, as long as there's some damage. But I still kind of gave her the benefit of the doubt. But that's when, my doubts started to creep in as to what is really going on here. And then shortly after that, that's when this committee was formed to be like an advisory committee to the website. And I thought, well, this is interesting. It was full of people who had no background in the web. So I thought, I just thought the whole thing it seemed to start to be designed to push me out. When I said, well, I'd love to be at those meetings so I can, explain why I made choices. She really just you could see her sort of scramble to figure out a way to not make that happen. And once I had enough evidence for myself that these are not coming from a place of good intention, or at least like just caring about me as a human being and my well-being and my needs. Even if they didn't match the organization's needs, at least like those conversations should be happening. And it seemed very, I don't know, I just like kept trusting my gut that like, this does not feel right. I am not feeling valued here. My voice does not seem to matter. This is not okay with me. And then as I spoke up, it just became more and more clear that, that it was about power until ultimately, I remember this meeting where after I had spoken up, the assistant deans of the school I was at, she was one of them, met with me, and she actually apologized to me for her behavior in front of the other two. And then within maybe, I don't know, a matter of like a month or around that, she gave me like a warning letter for not having swapped out, or for having swapped out a news story on the homepage of the website without this supposedly advisory committee's permission. And, there was no policy in place to do that. There was never even a conversation about needing to do that. So I realized then, like, she is trying to push me out. She's doing whatever she can. She is retaliating against me for speaking up in the first place. Because power, this is all about power for people, and the tactics are different. It can be anything from really obvious things like putting people down in meetings in front of other people without having a private conversation, just obvious things like put downs, angry outbursts, abusive phone calls, excessive criticisms, just destructive gossip, rumors, false accusations, all sorts of things like that, that, maybe somebody could be having an off day and it's out of character for them. But if it becomes part of a pattern of their behavior, or it could just be like this extreme situation where it's like it signals it's very completely obvious that, they are trying to do damage. These are all things that point to, it being an abusive situation. But there's also, those are sort of the obvious ones, but then there's all sorts of tactics that can be, whether they're intended to do harm or not, they usually result in harm. So these are things like giving people unreasonable workloads that they can't, most people or any reasonable person can't handle. Micromanaging, like excessive controlling of somebody's work, like I've mentioned in my own experience, having key areas of responsibility removed, trying to undermine somebody's reputation behind their back, which was also part of my story, removing tasks, they're crucial for somebody's job, purposely giving them inconsistent instructions. Some of these are hard to define whether there is purpose or not, but I think once there is an open conversation about it and you're still getting sort of pushback or excuses or sugarcoating or something, then that they don't have they're not looking out for your best interests as just a human who wants to feel safe and that they can trust their coworkers or bosses or higher ups. Just to kind of finish off this list here, they could be blowing off accomplishments, excluding people, pressuring people to not take advantage of things that they're entitled to, engaging in office politics, going into people's belongings. And then a big one, and I see this a lot actually when it comes to new management coming in and, wanting to bring in their own people. Sometimes they'll give bogus performance reviews so that they can push out people who are, probably great workers, but they want to bring in their own people. This is not all the time, but often a situation where a great employee poses a threat to the power of a higher up, and they take action to push the employee out. In fact, mobbing is a term that we use to talk about that escalation where, if anyone wants to look into the work of Dorothy Susskind, she's has a column on, she's done writing for Psychology Today, but she talks about this aspect brilliantly of, somebody having this skill that poses a threat to somebody else, and they just chip away at the confidence of that person by, asking questions. Oh, does this person, seem off today? Or, and they might ask that of somebody else in power. They're trying to undermine the reputation of the person who has this power through being competent. And then ultimately, they will try to seek they will try to tarnish the reputation of that person by getting people in that department to perceive that person the same way they do. So basically, bad-mouthing the person, making it seem like that person's incompetent. And then when the person starts to feel stressed from this situation, it becomes this situation where they're actually doing what the person said that they became who the perpetrator said that they were. They're, because of the stress, they might not be able to keep up with the workload. They might, be making errors, and it becomes this opportunity for the bully to say, like, well, see what I've been saying? Like, this is what I'm talking about. And then HR will generally ignore valid complaints, even if you're following their complaint process. Their aim is to vilify the person complaining so that they don't have to take the liability of it, even if it's actually illegal discrimination. The discrimination law is not, at least in how it's executed, it is not. It does not disrupt our social hierarchies and whose voices have the most social weight. That hierarchy has not really been disrupted since this discrimination law came out. I mean, there's been some movement for white women, but other than that, this system is designed to keep people who have the power to keep them in power. So, yeah, there's not like a one-size-fits-all scenario when it comes to the abuse tactics, but I would generally say that when someone's starting to feel confused, that's a big red flag, and somebody's feeling devalued, dismissed, and also somebody sees some kind of like chaos being created, whether that's with their emotions, their behavior, the way that they're treating people. Those are usually some pretty good signs that there's a problem. And if especially if an employee can see that happening in other areas, it becomes this like David versus Goliath situation where you as one person have so many fewer resources than any kind of business or organization usually, and going into the legal system, which is a pay-to-play system. The wealthier you are, the less of a risk it is. You're probably not going to lose all of your savings because of it, even if your savings do take a hit. But the less power you have at work, and that means the more likely you are to be bullied, but then it also means the less likely you are to be able to take advantage of the legal system. So, the whole system is sort of rigged this way, to not protect people.
If somebody knows that they're being bullied, and now I saw an instance when I was working at this hospital about this. We had a medical assistant, and she did her job, and she did it good, and she was quick. She didn't lag around. She just did her job. And she came from a different state. She had a wonderful accent. She was wonderful. She'd come in smiling and everything else, but for some odd reason, the clinical manager didn't really cotton to her at all. And I had no idea. I only worked there part-time. And but I would see the clinical manager be right behind her saying, I just saw that you didn't do that. And she'd say, should I not so much argue, but say, I just did it. So, and she'd say, let's go look at it. And so she'd check to make sure that it was done right. And a lot of times that even though it was done right, the girl would come back, the one that the clinical manager was talking to, and you could tell that she was very upset. And she said, I did it, but it wasn't good enough, I guess. And she did that for so long, but she did that when I was there 4 or 5 times a day. The clinical manager would follow her. Now, here's a young girl that had come from a different state. I maybe moved in with roommates or, people that she knew. Why? I mean, I heard what you're talking about, Deborah, about power and everything else, but why? This girl was on a low position. That there was nobody going to come and fill her position. We would have ended up doing it. Maybe there was, could it have been like they had to get rid of one person because of the finances? To me, a lot of this doesn't make sense as to why people need to do that. And this clinical manager would do it in the open. It wouldn't be like, come to my office, I want to discuss something with you.
Yeah, that, I mean, I guess on a couple different levels, the why really comes down to, those tactics are designed to break down somebody. I mean, so like you mentioned, she didn't take her into her office, or she didn't say like, we could improve on this. Can I teach you a different way? Can I show you what my expectations are? It seems from what you're describing. Yeah, it seems from what you're describing that it's designed to break down. She has the power. She knows who doesn't have the power, and she knows that the person who doesn't have the power is actually competent at her job, and therefore she wants to take her down a notch or push her out, or for whatever reason she's seeing that as a threat. And the reason that people get there in the first place, to that wanting that power and taking it out on people who are there to do a good job, can actually, sometimes it's just that they're bad managers and they just don't know a better way. They don't know that empathy and human well-being are major parts of the equation to getting people to come in and feel energized and feel inspired and excited about their work. But they also, in some cases, on the other side of that spectrum, to just not knowing how to be a good boss, is like full-blown narcissism, or being somewhere on this narcissistic spectrum, or closer to those behaviors where it's all about them. It's all about them looking great. They don't want anyone else to look great except them. And it becomes this, anywhere on that spectrum, really, it can become this situation where, because of, childhood situations, a lot of this is just rooted in childhood, where, both people, the bully and the target, could have grown up in an environment where they didn't receive conditional or unconditional love, I should say, and they've learned to cope with that, but just in different ways. Again, neither of these people necessarily apply to this, but it's really a way of coping with shame. So on the bully's end of it, they decide that they perceive things through this lens of, everything's around power. They're competitive. Everything's this world of limited resources, and they can't share having a good image. And then from the target's standpoint, the one who's being victimized in this case, they generally just want to see the organization succeed. They want their, if it's a nurse or a teacher, which happen to be the two of the biggest fields where this type of behavior is just rampant. The healing professions in general, you see a lot of people where they just want to help they just want to do good in the world. They want to be collaborative. They want to be cooperative, and that culture, or having a lot of people be part of that culture, it just makes it ripe for somebody who comes in and wants power to have, a bunch of people that they can push around, basically. And it becomes even worse when, or I shouldn't say worse, but another dynamic to this is that a lot of discrimination actually gets funneled through bullying behavior. And so, somebody who, whether it's like a Black worker or a Hispanic worker, if they might be experiencing some of these behaviors that their white coworkers are not experiencing, and they actually may not recognize it as bullying because it's something they've experienced their whole lives, and they, don't see that this situation is really any different, but they do see like sort of this hierarchy that gets created around cliques, and the higher ups knowing who they can go to act out their power moves, and it really just becomes about like these different, I always position it as like these clashing worldviews, but it always feels uncomfortable for me because one of them one of the groups has a higher moral compass, so to say that it's a clash is off, and not only that, but there's a power structure in there. So, there isn't an even playing field that we're talking about, and it makes the whole problem even worse because it affects people's livelihoods. It affects their whole lives. I mean, we've heard of anything from stress-related symptoms, anxiety, depression, to PTSD, all the way to actual suicide. A lot of people have suicide ideation who experience this. They internalize it. It just affects our self-worth. It affects so many aspects of our lives. Marriages break up over this because it can become all-consuming. It can affect friendships. People often don't get the support they need because a lot of people want to victim blame because they assume, they want to believe that we live in a just world and the person who's being mistreated had to have done something to bring it on. So there's all these layers. Oh, go ahead.
Well, while you're saying that, you believe in the organization, and with that example I just mentioned about this young girl that was in a basically low position, and she was I thought she was doing a great job, but watching her, and I wasn't the only one, and two of us ended up going to human resources, and when they did nothing, and all they did was sit and listen to us, and I guess that was what they were supposed to do, but nothing was ever done. Then you start losing trust in people. And then you end up with the whole thing of, well, this one didn't do anything. Of course, I didn't know anything. I mean, they could have done it behind closed doors, but this woman kept badgering this young girl. And as an adult, older and going to human resources, I expected her to stop. Yeah. I wanted this clinical manager to just slow down and realize that this girl is doing the very best job that she knows how. She wasn't making errors, not that I saw. Mm-hmm. And the other nurse felt the same way. So if two people go to human resources and still nothing gets done, how do you trust even the whole environment, the agency? That just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this. One of the biggest pieces is exactly what you just described. There's it's one thing to have one bad apple who's bullying you, and you think like, okay, this person just isn't competent. But when anyone goes to HR and expects their employer to care that there's this toxicity that's affecting productivity and morale and their bottom line, really, it's a little bit different when, that's another element of healthcare and education, is that their money is going to keep rolling in no matter how incompetent their managers are, and no matter how poor they are at dealing with these situations. But for the target, it adds this extra layer of trauma, because they're not just being betrayed by their boss or their coworker who should be, helping them have a safe working environment, but now it moves on to the employer who's betrayed them. And then, if they think like, well, I'll just sue then. I mean, I don't want to sue, which most people don't. Most people don't want to go through the re-trauma. They don't want to spend a ton of their money in legal fees. But then they realize that like the government is not supporting them. There is no law against workplace abuse unless you are in a protected class, unless it's covered by discrimination law. And even then, it is very hard to prove. The courts have over time, gone backwards in a major sense, in that they require proof of discriminatory intent, which is incredibly hard to prove. And so, just in the scenario that you described, people see that when other people are reporting something and nothing's getting done, that they don't have a safe environment to report something in. And so, and then when you extend that to entire professions, where in the case of nurses and teachers, they could go to a different hospital or a different school, but like it's likely to just happen there too. And then in the case of teachers, they have just a couple months or a few months of the year to even find a new job. So it's really the employers knowing the power that they have and doing what they can to abuse that power. And there is nothing in check that is upholding our values as a society, that we want people to feel safe. We want people to feel healthy. The government is doing nothing to protect people. In fact, in general, our workers' rights in the U.S. do not really favor employees. We do not have many rights as workers in this country that people enjoy, in many other countries. A lot of other countries have laws against workplace bullying. And, here in the U.S., we seem to, as a culture, value this competitive, power tripping, these dynamics that aren't conducive to our well-being.
Now, before we end this session, do you have any laws out there? Are you working on anything with the legislation that you can talk about, or?
Yeah, so we have what's called the Dignity at Work Act. We're trying to introduce it in every state across the country, mostly because that introducing it in states first can lead, or has historically been more likely to lead to federal passage. So we have bills introduced in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We're working on some efforts to modify a bill that's been introduced in Washington State, New York, and most likely West Virginia, so that, we should have some efforts in those 5 states. And then a multitude of other states, about 12 other states that have some, people on the ground working to get, find a state legislator to introduce this bill. And basically what the bill would do is give workers legal recourse if they experience damage to their work environment that can affect. Wow. It doesn't even have to necessarily have affected their health, but is just in line with discrimination or sexual harassment law. If there is damage to the working environment, the person has a legal claim, or can have a legal claim, I should say. And with the intention of employers preventing this toxic behavior to begin with. And we don't want to clog the courts with lawsuits or even really encourage people to go the legal route because, it's ultimately people's decision and we want people to have options. But to, one factor that I've seen and people have described is like, how much more energy do I want to put into this right. employer who has not cared about me. So it's really the whole entire goal is to keep employers in check and to show them that if they don't want to care about this issue, at least the government does. And hopefully, it would keep protecting people and not experience some of the same, regressive ways of implementing it that discrimination law has seen. But ultimately, we're here to fight for safety for workers, not just physical safety like OSHA is protecting, but psychological safety as well. And we can't do that without changing our policies.
Right. And that is a tough one there. Now, before we leave, can people get in touch with you, Debra? Can you say anything about, what your program, if they can as I said, get in touch with you?
Yeah, so through Dignity Together, I run boot camps for people navigating workplace abuse and also separately for people who are out of their toxic situations and healing from it. I think there's a lot of expectations around healing that I think further damage people. So the whole idea is to bring people together, help them feel heard, validated by people who get it, by people who get this phenomenon and have experienced something similar. And in both of those cases, those courses lead to larger courses where we go through either the whole healing process or just more information of options on what choices people can make if they're going through it right now. I also have through my work with Redefine at Redefine Ourselves. So that the previous one is dignitytogether.org, and then redefineourselves.com is virtual summits, in-person retreats, to really understand this more in depth, to connect with more people, either online or in person, but just to give people more opportunity to understand this phenomenon and that it is an epidemic, why it's happening, how they can detach from it. And then lastly, there's the work that I'm doing through the National Workplace Bullying Coalition, which is at workplacebullyingcoalition.org, which is the Dignity at Work Act, and that's dignityatworkact.org, where people, no matter what state they're in, there are actions that they can take. If they don't have a Dignity at Work Act in their state, they can either talk to me about introducing it, or they can join a state team if there is one. They don't have to have any experience. I walked into this whole situation just knowing that it happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. So they don't have to have an ounce of political experience. We'll walk them through the entire process that, we know of. We haven't been able to pass a bill yet, but we're really focused on building this national movement of people standing up, and when one person uses their voice to stand up, giving permission to somebody else to do the same, and just really collectively taking our power back. I mean, we saw this with the Great Resignation, and I think that we can do it with holding employers accountable for bullying too.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. Hopefully you'll be coming back on the show and letting us know what's going on.
Yeah, anytime.
And
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. So I want to thank Lillian Caldwell. She is the CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, and Jeannie White, who is the station manager, for allowing us time on the station. So I will sign off and say, I guess goodbye or good night or whatever time is in your place. So we will talk at a different time.